Welcome back to another episode of Projecting Grandeur. I am your host, Ron Dichter. Today we are going to get into it. Every great company has an origin story. And when you are starting out your company or you're rebranding or anything like that, there needs to be a good reason why. I did an episode a few weeks ago called Facts Tell and Stories Sell. And the story of how a company has come together is really important. If you think about Nike, for example, the coach of Oregon wanted his runner to have a better set of shoes to absorb the shock. So he built a sole for the shoe with a waffle press and silicone. And that's how that whole company got started. And if I think about the origin story in my own life, there's been a handful of times where, organically something happened in my life that allowed me to, really frame up a story, even a name of a company based upon things that happen. And I think people take for granted all of the things that happen in this early time frame of when you're starting a business, that they don't pay attention to the organic and natural stories that lend itself to really helping to shape what your company is, because that story is so important. It's vital for people to want to really embrace and buy into the organization. And obviously there are companies that don't have a strong or compelling origin story that have been successful. But man, when you get that origin story and you are able to narrate and tell that story about how the company started, it really does change things. If I think about my companies of the past, I'll just tell you kind of some stories of how things started. So one of my favorites is a company that I had from 2013 until I sold it in 2020. It was a company called Blue Dog, and the full name was Blue Dog Business Services. And this was a business services company focusing on integrating payments into software platforms. And when I had started that company, I had just sold a company prior to that, which I'll talk about that here in a bit. And I went into, quote, retirement, which lasted for about, 48, maybe 72 hours until I was bored out of my mind and ready to kind of go for my next challenge. And, Blue Dog was, not the name of the company initially. I was trying to actually figure out, what am I going to call this company? And at the time, my son must have been about 5 or 6 years old. And I was sitting in my home office, just kind of, working away on the business model and thinking in my head, gosh, what am I going to name this thing? And my son had walked into my office and he said, hey, Dad, I can't find Blue Dog. And Blue Dog was this little stuffed animal that he'd had since birth. It went everywhere with us. And, I looked at him and I said, look, I'm sure it's somewhere in your room. Just go find it and, move stuff around, check in your bed. I'm sure he'll turn up. About an hour later, he came back in my office and I could tell that he was visibly upset. And he's like, Dad, with his lip quivering, he's like, I don't know where Blue Dog is. And, I had known in my life that, at some point we might lose this thing, but I was like, not gonna be today. And so I grabbed him and I said, okay, let's go retrace all your steps. Let's go think of all the places that, you've been, and let's go find Blue Dog. And we spent a good hour and a half just turning the house upside down trying to find it. Went into the car. I grabbed my wife and I said, hey, can you help us find Blue Dog? And we kept searching and searching until we kind of came to the realization that he's gone. And so I was in my office and I was kind of preparing my speech for my 5-year-old son to basically say, hey, Blue Dog is gone. It's time to go on. There'll be a life after Blue Dog. And then I just kind of looked out into the backyard and something stood out to me. I looked, and in the child swing, I could just see something poking up out of the top. And so before I delivered the speech, I just said, hang on one sec. And I went outside, and sure enough, in that kid's swing was little Blue Dog. And I guess my son had been pushing him in that swing earlier that day. And I grabbed Blue Dog and I brought him back to my son. And my goodness, that look on his face, that elation of just like, I've saved the day and life is better now that he has Blue Dog. I was like, that's it. I go, that's the experience I want to give to my customers. That's the feeling I want to give to my employees. I want Blue Dog to be their security blanket so that everybody feels good. And that is how the name Blue Dog started. And the tagline of the company was best friend to your business. And it did, smashingly successful. Sold it in 2020, and it was a great business. And really proud of the time that I spent there. And while they've changed the name since it's been acquired, there's still 70 people in the original Blue Dog office, which still has a dog on it, that runs. So that's kind of how that company started. And that story, I used to tell it all the time. I remember sitting in a conference room with a really large customer, or a really large potential customer, and the CFO was a woman named Shelly, and it was me, the sales rep, and call it 5 executives from their company, and she asked how the name got started, and I told her that story, and she literally had tears, signed them on the spot. So the origin story is incredibly powerful, incredibly compelling. This was an organic one. It naturally happened. They aren't always that way. I have another company that I started in my early days called Millennium International. And the tagline of that company was, the company's future is the future. Now, this was in, I think, 1995. I was, 21 years old. And, this business, was bridging the gap between businesses and, people on the web, which today obviously is a joke, but in 1995, the World Wide Web was only 3 years old. Like, that was pretty revolutionary. And, our whole message was, we're bringing the world into the 21st century, right? It was 1995, millennium, turn of the century, and the whole company's future is the future. And granted, that was really time-based, right? We had the opportunity of time on our hands, and the fact that it was 1995 really gave us that opportunity to, say that message. That would be harder to do, maybe in 2005, but very compelling message. That was actually my first exit of a business. Me and my business partner sold that one, at about 350 clients, and really proud of, that early experience and that early win as well. Another time, I had a company called Elliott Management Group, and this company, when we got that thing off the ground, it was me. I brought in 2 other people, one of my partners from Millennium and another gentleman that we had brought in from another interaction we had in a different business. And I brought these 2 guys in, and I said, look, here's what we're trying to do. And again, this was a traditional selling payments and fintech products, face-to-face, in-person appointments. Ended up growing that business to over 100 million in sales, and it was really a great business, still operates today. I again started that business in 1997, sold that business in 2010 is when I fully exited, and again still exists today 15 years later. So really proud of that. They have hundreds of employees, billions of dollars in payments that they process. But the name Elliott Management Group, so I was, 1997, I was 23 years old, and we wanted to project grandeur. Maybe a familiar topic for the show here. And our goal was to project grandeur because I was this young, 23-year-old kid. I'd wear a suit and tie every day because I wanted to look more mature and look more businessy, if you will. And at the time, all of the companies that were in our space had the word payments in it, had the word, financial in it. They tried to sound like a bank. And what I wanted to do was sound more like a law firm or a professional services company. And so Elliott, which happens to be my middle name, we said, gosh, Elliott Management Group, or EMG, had a really nice sound to it. It sounded very professional and mature. Little did I know there was a private equity company also called Elliott Management Group. Fortunately, my middle name only has 1 L and 1 T, so we could discern ourselves away from them. But the goal here was to project grandeur, that we're this very professional, very refined organization. Obviously, it worked. We grew that, through the help of an amazing team to over 100 million in sales, 350 employees before I sold that in 2010. So again, another time where that story became really important and instrumental in being able to convey to the world. And my latest business, which is a software company that's focused on the health and wellness space called Sixpack. It's funny, when I started this business, people are like, Sixpack? They're like, that's just such a weird name. And I said, yeah, but when you think of a six-pack, now granted, I don't want to body shame anyone or have this, you know, used against me, but in my view, right? This is my POV. When I think of six-pack abs, to me, that represents something or someone in peak physical condition, right? They've got the muscle tone, they've got the reduced body fat, obviously they take care of themselves and they exercise. So to me, the six-pack abs represent that perfect physique. And so when I think about what I'm hoping for six-pack, the software to be, is that perfect software, that, you know, chiseled, perfect, absolutely dynamite software that's going to change the way that people can run their business, change the way people interact with their businesses, and really create this just perfect embodiment of what software should be. It's sleek, it's agile, it's chiseled to perfection. That is where the name came from. And so then we tell that origin story and people get it. So as you're thinking about your business, as you're thinking about your idea, you know, what it is you want to start, you gotta have a good origin story. You know, I prefer it to be an organic story that actually happens, but if you need to embellish or manufacture that story, you know, that's fine too. You just have to believe it, you have to embrace it, you have to own it, and you have to be able to be persuasive in telling it. And so as you're getting going, as people start to question what the name of the business is, perfect that origin story, perfect why people should do business with you. Go out there, don't miss opportunities, pay attention to what's happening around you. You'll be amazed at the stories that come. Hope this is helpful. Thanks again for everybody that's been tuning in. It's been a ton of fun sharing what rattles around inside of my brain. And please don't forget to share this so we can start spreading the word. Have a good day, everyone. Later.